Welcome back. You're still watching World Insight, coming to you live from Beijing. I'm Tian Wei. The Chinese movie market is getting hotter as summer has got into full swing. One film in particular, home-produced Ne Zha, overtook Disney's Zootopia as the highest-grossing animated film on the Chinese mainland. So far, it raked in over 3.5 billion yuan, or more than $500 million at the box office, making it China's surprise summer blockbuster. Take a look at the stories behind it and what industry insiders said about the booming industry.
To many Chinese, the household name Ne Zha would probably evoke the exquisite 1979 animated film Prince Ne Zha's Triumph Against Dragon King, which portrayed a selfless and handsome young warrior. But in the 2019 animation, a black-eyed, mischievous, and to some extent wily Ne Zha appears on screen. Rather than being born as a pure and adorable baby boy, Ne Zha is the human incarnation of an evil being, which brought about contempt from his fellow villagers. Surprisingly, the new Ne Zha won the hearts of moviegoers and earned strong reviews. But director Yang Yu and his team faced many challenges in making the biggest ever animation blockbuster. The production involved more than 1,600 people with more than 1,400 shots of special visual effects, the largest number ever for a Chinese animated film. In recent years, other animations based on classic Chinese stories like Monkey King, Hero is Back, and White Snake have also achieved commercial success. However, Hao Yu, the co-founder of Baozong Manhua, one of China's leading animated film studios, said, a mature film industry is not just about box office performance. Hao pointed out China's animation professionals need to seek a new identity when building an industry of their own.
From investor mentality to financial products to support production, to marketing and distribution, to downstream consumer goods market, all of that, and also very importantly the general public's attitudes towards animation, all of that needs to evolve and improve in order for us to become a mature industry.
Indeed, China has been catching up fast in terms of cultivating animation artists and improving its macro environment. The country's animation industry was worth more than $25 billion in 2018.
For more on the vibrant Chinese animation industry, we have in New York Joanna Chang, an intercultural film critic and filmmaker, and in Beijing, Professor Teng Jimeng, a professor of film industry. Thank you so much for joining us, the two of you. Professor Teng, I want to go to you first. Very briefly, does money say everything? In other words, does box office indicate the quality of this blockbuster animation film, Ne Zha?
Well, absolutely. I think in the Chinese market, money talks, money makes the benchmark, and money actually sets the standards. And Ne Zha actually, to me, has been always the very best of the best since basically 1941 or perhaps 1961 or 1979. All these 3 years actually produces some of these milestone flicks and animation flicks so far and per se. And so Ne Zha this time around represents the highest quality, the highest in terms of the visual quality, the story narrative, and also the cultural logic in terms of the storytelling and also the social commentary, the message in general.
Wow, a lot of information in your answer. But when you talk about different generations of Chinese animation, maybe we should take a look at it. Chinese animation has had a long history, at least for decades so far. The founding of the People's Republic of China 70 years ago, the animation industry had a growth spurt. There were not only many produced films, but also the quality have also improved, some say. According to some of our earlier productions, Uproar in Heaven, for example, was often cited as the peak of homegrown animation. In 1960, China completed the first ink painting animation, Tadpoles Looking for Their Mummy, and from 1978 to 1989, there were also impressive works such as Prince Naja's Triumph Against the Dragon King, Calabash Brothers, and Sheriff Black's Cat. In recent years, Monkey King, Hero is Back, Big Fish Begonia, and the recent Naja have pushed the Chinese animated films to the top. Look at that. Oh, I really want to sit here and watch all of these productions once again. Beautiful ones. A lot of stories there. Joanna, let me ask you also about that. Do you see an evolution of the way of producing animated films and also the content and the stories related to it? Joanna.
Absolutely. I do see Chinese film industry, in this case, the animation industry, it has been making its great progress with the debut of this wonderful fantasy film, fantasy genre, in my mind. And we are witnessing the dawn of the Chinese animation on the global platform. You know, the Chinese film industry has been taking over the world's market as the second world largest as of now. But its animation has never really been taking the hold of its audience. In this case, with the domestic only, it becomes such a success. Its posture reminds me of the Marvel universe or DC universe. So it is really, in terms of content, it gives us this universal values. So I really congratulate the film team.
The common values you're talking about, Ms. Chung, certainly are very crucial for films to be successful around the world. After all, we share very similar logic of life, isn't it? Even the way that we feel about the others. It's really a universal language. But on the other hand, Ms. Chung, I also want you to shed some light about this, because if you look at that, you know, Zootopia, or some of the other early films, Mulan, for example, even about the Chinese story, and also Panda as well. So these are stories made by Hollywood, even though original stories were coming from China. So what do you make of this latest effort to make China's own stories with China's own production? I'm not saying everything has to be Chinese in order to be better. I'm just saying, what about this version?
I really enjoyed this version, although I'm yet to really see the complete version of it. I'm just so thrilled that finally the Chinese mythology is being creatively exploited by our own filmmakers. And we have way too long a history of Chinese icons being, creatively exploited by the Hollywood industry. So here comes the dawn of Chinese culture, perhaps, in terms of introducing new characters. Naja as a character could be very well the next flagship Chinese character, standing right next to the Monkey King, which has been well known. But Naja is somewhat different. It is so unique, particularly in this film. It is small in size, but big in its idea and its mission, that is justice, and strong in its will. So it is the ultimate symbol of this rebellious figure, which should be very welcome in the Chinese culture.
I see.
But only in the fantasy film, perhaps. So in reality, that's another matter.
But Professor Tang, I mean, if you look at it, this is one of the very few successful examples of China's stories made by the Chinese team, successful in the Chinese film market, animation film. So is this a very start of something much bigger to come, or this is a sporadic case that we shouldn't read too much into it, Professor?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be something bigger to come. This is supposed to be, like Joanne said, this is something like a starting point that we see the Chinese animation film to be going global on world stage. And so take Ne Zha, for example. This is something that existed before, right? I mean, we see Sun Wukong, the Monkey King, and now we see a new sort of parallelism to this very Sun Wukong. All these two characters share one thing in common. They are rebellious. They are actually pretty much kind of anti this very old establishment, right, in a way. And so in this sense, it appeals to this very young generation now living in China, which we call the Generation Z. It is a generation born since the 1990s. They were actually living in prosperity. They were living a very much better life than us, basically. And they enjoyed the freedom of expression, the freedom of expressing themselves visually. And so take the director, for example. I mean, Yang Yu is a director born in Sichuan province, basically a backwater small town, but then exposed to this high tech. And now he rises with this high tech and tries to tell his own story.
These are exciting, but yes, you can see also through our screen some of the excerpts from different kinds of animation films, whether Chinese or foreign, different generations as well. But here is the thing. I mean, we talk about the heydays of Chinese animation, new generation. We talk about that for a few years, I remember, Professor. I remember you and I were sitting here in the studio on the same topic several years ago and saying, it's coming, it's coming.
Right.
But it's not necessarily coming until this film. So the question really is, are we too excited just for one case? Or what is the genes of success, really, for the animation films in China? Or maybe not that different in other parts of the world, Professor?
Not different from the other parts of the world. I think it is also in our gene. And take, for example, in 1941, the Iron Fan Princess. That great story told actually through the One Brothers animation studio. And it was traditionally done through hand-drawn pictures. And it inspires. And here I see that these great directors actually inspires. I mean, the current director, Yang Yu, was inspired. And the Japanese, Miyazaki, and also Osamu, they were all inspired by their predecessors here in China. And so I see a kind of progressive evolution. Each of these generations were inspiring the next. And with technological advances, they're also they're capable of building something upon the old.
I know you want to be positive. Every time you're here, you're positive for the industry. I mean, it's good for you to do that. But on the other hand, there are a lot of things going on there. Ms. Cheng, I want to invite your wisdom as well about what are some of the important factors that would make an animation industry successful. If Hollywood could be successful in that regard, can China also duplicate those factors? Ms. Cheng.
Well, China should have its own creative engine, which is now up and running with the launching of this Ne Zha film. China should never really copy anyone, because you really have your own source of inspiration with this 6,000 or 8,000 years of history. Particularly, Chinese mythology is one of the oldest mythology, but it's very well, it's understudied. So I think the Chinese industry has a great future if you can just dive into your own source of culture. However, there is a problem of reality which sometimes does not really encourage a kind of voice. So that's why I was saying ironically at the very beginning, and I say certain message can only be delivered through fantasy film or probably through animation. But I would like to think China now at this 21st century is taking its leap on the global stage. It should be open enough to welcome all voices. In this particular film, this little character of Ne Zha is presenting a question. He said, "God or demon, up to me." That is a very big choice of this individual, very strong will. So the new generations in China right now is under great pressure of becoming someone. So this ultimate theme of who am I, who I really am, who I want to be, become the central theme or a challenging question that play a great role in the mind of the viewer. I think that's perhaps part of the reason why it is successful.
Well, Joanne, I don't think it's a problem.
Of course, financially too.
Okay, go ahead.
I think that's not an issue, Joanne. I think it is exactly the very opportunity. I mean, the opportunity presented by the current Chinese reality, that they're now able to express themselves freely, so freely. And with also the technology, look at the 3D technology, the IMAX with everything, the CG and the EFX, the CFX technology that this director has mastered. I mean, it is prospering basically with this very
technologically speaking,
yeah,
yes,
right.
indeed. But there's an issue about talents too, Professor Tang. I have to mention about that. For example, a lot of those talents in the animation films have gone to the computer games industry because that's earning more money. That's just a fact of life. But when it comes to an industry, you have to have the nurturing of generations of talent, many of them. Is it happening? Through what way should be happening?
I think it is happening, first thing first, with the general favorable policy environment. Right now, since 2000, the Chinese cultural authorities allocated huge amount of subsidies to support these startup companies. In fact, this director actually started his own company, his own company to do animations. He actually helping and doing a lot of outsourcing, helping animation studios to produce films, and sometimes, with big studios. And that is why this company actually works and survives and thrives. And eventually, Ian Light, Mr. Wang Changtian actually almost handpicked this director to take this very particular assignment and make it a global one, like Joanne said. And so in a sense, I think the technology is out there, the talent's out there, even though that we're suffering hurdles in a commercialized environment, that young people tend to be allured by high salaries and compensations by these gaming companies.
On the other hand, Ms. Chang, I do want to ask you a related question. Earlier we talked about what does it take for animation films to be successful in China, in the Chinese market. Everybody knows it's the biggest market in the world. Once you have it successful here, it means you have a global success. But it does not necessarily mean the film itself does have a global communication, only because of box office success here in China. So with China becoming ever more prominent worldwide, obviously, people are curious about this country and its cultural productions, but how will its cultural production be able to speak also to the international audience, to have blossom both inside and beyond its border? I guess that's a wish and a hope many have, both here in China and I guess from other parts of the world as well. Ms. Chang, your thoughts?
Well, I really think cultivating a new generations of filmmakers that really dive into Chinese heritage is one of the key elements of promoting Chinese culture on the global stage. China is an old country, but it's also new, very powerful. If we see China from the outside point of view, many view it as a partner, and sometimes view it as a counterpart, and some people view it as a threat. So people don't understand. People in the United States, for example, they do not really understand China as a human China. That's why film plays a great cultural role to decipher who Chinese people really are. So that's why I think Ne Zha, as one of the, I would consider it one of the perhaps best film in China, play a great role. And I think we need to understand China from the outside and from the inside. Professor Teng put a great point forward, saying China has a great policy. And indeed, but the outside people doesn't really understand that. In fact, the international political scene is very heated right now. And we really in desperate need of producing more films like this to exemplify who the Chinese really are, or the essence is. More realistic film at the same time of animation, I hope.
Professor Tang, I want to follow up by the great remarks made by Ms. Chang. There's so much energy in the Chinese society. There's so much difference and development in the Chinese society, and yet it has been simplified when it comes to what China is, when media is portraying about it, for example, when politics is describing China, or geopolitics is trying to portray China. So, Professor Tang, how to make sure things about the real China and what really the Chinese appreciate and love will be able to get also across to the other parts of the world, Professor Tang?
First off, I actually quite agree with Joanne in terms of presenting China in a much more human manner. And I do agree that China actually is in dire need of good storytellers. I mean, in this sense, I think that哪吒provides its chance to see a good storytelling example, to be human, to be close, to be intimate, and actually to be, in a sense, a little bit naughty in this case.
To make mistake and also correct your mistake.
That's right. I mean, look at this character, right? The dark, blue-eyed, crooked teeth, and also sometimes angry, sometimes it is the funny, super fun character. I mean, once again, we're looking forward to a kind of a Chinese Marvel, perhaps, or Chinese Disneyland, sort of animated characters. In this sense, I think that we do need much more a human, much kind of intimate, and also a much fun way, and sometimes even a wacky way to tell our story to the rest of the world.
Okay, we'll have to wrap up today's conversation, but I'm sure the conversation about the best films and also the various parts of Chinese culture will continue. Thank you so much, Joanna Cheng and Teng Jimeng. Really appreciate it. Thank you.